Okay, now we're going to record. Now we've done our reviews of the war. We've got Sharp Fog of War. And today I want to focus on talking about the Holocaust. I think I said last class before, I really, when I first started teaching, I really struggled with how to approach the Holocaust because I think some people have had kind of so much on it and kind of throwing some light facts their way. It's like, oh, I already know all this. Other people don't know anything about it, and I really don't want you to finish a world history class and not grapple with, I think, one of the most anxious moments, the most confusing, perplexing, horrifying, devastating kind of acts of the 20th century. So I want to make sure we attend to the Holocaust. When I first started teaching it, I turned to the Holocaust Museum, and that's kind of where I want us to start here. Let me share my screen again with you guys at home. That is for later. The Holocaust Museum in Washington, D.C., I went to it when it first opened so long ago, and I haven't been again. And right now, you can see it's temporarily closed still. But I definitely recommend. DC is such a great city to go to when we can go places. You guys get in the car and drive there because so many of the museums there are free. So it really is just a kind of you can walk in and out. You don't have to like sort of commit to everything. Although you probably need reservations at the Holocaust Museum and the African American History Museum. Anyway, the Holocaust Museum is also a memorial. It's also a scholarly area where they're actually doing a lot of active scholarship. So I looked for them, and you can look even just on their website. You can learn about a lot of other things that aren't just the official Holocaust that happened in World War II. There's a lot of other concerns that they have about human rights in general, like genocide, widely all over the world, and also anti-Semitism, kind of all throughout all time. But clicking around about the Holocaust brings you to some other articles. I think probably the modules that you guys are supposed to have explored for today will really help a lot. But let me maybe first, since we're kind of in a movie watching mode, there's this really helpful. It's kind of old fashioned, but it's just a 2-minute overview of the Holocaust, and I'm going to want to have you guys watch that together. And I'll post a link on Slack so you can see it there as well.
Before World War II, more than half of the world's Jewish population lived in Europe. Most Jews lived in Eastern Europe, primarily in the Soviet Union and Poland. The Nazi Party came to power in Germany in 1933.
Which we already learned about.
The Germans moved to extend their power in Central Europe, annexing Austria and destroying Czechoslovakia. Germany invaded Poland in 1939, beginning World War II. Over the next 2 years, German forces conquered most of Europe. The Germans established ghettos in occupied eastern territories, isolating and persecuting the Jewish population. Nazi anti-Jewish policy expanded with the invasion of the Soviet Union in 1941. Mobile killing units murdered Jews, Roma, also called gypsies, Soviet political commissars, and others. The Germans and their collaborators deported Jews to extermination camps in occupied Poland. At the largest extermination camp, Auschwitz-Birkenau, transports arrived almost daily from across Europe. By war's end, almost 6 million Jews and millions of others had perished in the Holocaust.
So that is a really fact-based overview. I mean, that's just sort of the bare minimum, but I think it gives us dates and numbers, and with the map, you can kind of see places and the scope. I think just hearing that isn't remotely the whole story. One of the things, we get back to this, the definition of the Holocaust here, I think, is really helpful. So I might recommend that you write that down in your notes. Usually I have to write it on the board, but this is so much easier. So the systematic state-sponsored persecution and murder of 6 million Jews by the Nazi regime and its allies and collaborators. And I think this is really interesting to think about because it's the it's not just that people died, right? It's that it was so organized. It was from the top down from the government, right? And then it's not just the Nazis. It's not a handful of bad eggs. It is allies, collaborators, right? It takes an entire um, continent of people agreeing to do this in order for it to work. One person, a handful of people can't kill, this many people. Can't organize this kind of effort. And so we see really from 1933 when Hitler's put into power, 1945 when he commits suicide. The 33 to 45 are kind of the official dates. Although certainly there's lifelong legacies for the survivors. I actually saw an article this morning that in New York State there are thousands of Holocaust survivors, like now in their 1990s, and there's this organized effort trying to make sure they all get the COVID vaccine, which I just thought was really moving. That they're still kind of seen as a group that needs special reverence, special respect for what they went through. And so it is mostly Jewish people, but there's also, as the movie said, millions more people. Homosexuals are targeted, people who are seen as mentally retarded or otherwise unfit. People are sterilized. People who are Jehovah's Witnesses. Anyone who's a political opponent could easily be also swept up in this. Soviet prisoners of war, even Soviet soldiers, right? Not just Soviet commissars. And part of that is because of Hitler's racist focus on kind of who's superior, and Slavs, which includes the Russians, are in the inferior category, and Jews are obviously kind of at the bottom of the category of groups he wants to erase. I think it's important. Let me just, I don't have like a PowerPoint for today. Oh, Emily said she visited. Yeah, Emily, will you tell me a little bit about your visit? I didn't see your chat until just now.
Yeah, so I got to go in the summer of 2019, and it was really awesome. Like, it's sad, obviously, like to go through it, and it's hard to like go through it, but it was kind of awesome in the same regard that you got to see more of something that you wouldn't see in like history class. And one thing that like really impacted me was the shoes. I know
I was
everyone
gonna
just,
say the shoes.
but when you see
Yeah.
the shoes and they're all laying in the wall, it was just like, humbling to think of that, and like sad, but it was also to know that that happened to people.
Emily, that's such. I went so long ago, and the shoes are really one of the things that stuck with me also. You kind of walk through almost like, at least when I went, it was sort of almost like a little bridge, like in a room, and on either side are these huge piles of people's actual shoes. It's really, I mean, there's so many different ways to make things meaningful, but I think using an artifact like that, like it actually came off someone's foot, and right before they were probably sent into the gas chambers and then saved for their value as leather, and then taken up afterwards. I mean, the whole history of that shoe is the whole history of that person's life, or for the kid size shoes, or whatever. You can just sort of, the shoes tell such a strong story. Thank you, Emily. That's really a good point. Yeah, Charles, I think you're right also to bring up the idea of marking. And the idea of making people other, right? We're us, you're them. It's us versus them. And your problems, I think I said before about fascism, I meant to say, right? Let's say you're an unemployed plumber in Germany, your wife has left you, your kids won't speak to you anymore, but you're an Aryan, right? You're a Nazi. Come together. We're going to help you. If we just get rid of all those Jews, your life will be better, which is obviously ludicrous, right? Like getting rid of all the Jews out of Germany isn't going to give him a job in plumbing, isn't make his wife come back, it isn't going to make his kids or make him be more, popular on the block. But like the solutions to everyone's problems are presented as, we will get rid of this group of people, and then all of a sudden your life will be back to normal. Your life will be how you want it to be, which is a ridiculous and impossible promise. But again, with fascism and Nazism still being kind of so irrational, I think people just, it's the Great Depression, they've got nothing else to hope for, and Hitler gives them that. Yeah, Riley.
Were the Nazis paid well?
Were they what?
Paid well?
Oh, that's a good question. So I don't, from what I know, I think those jobs are the same kinds of jobs as you would have in a republic system, just the same. So I think to work for the German government, and the Nazi apparatus is probably the same as to work for the German government when it was a republic. And I think there have been actual studies, we can talk in a minute. One of the other things I learned from the Holocaust Museum I'll get to this in just a second. I think I have it on the outline. Is the idea of thinking about people in different categories, like perpetrators, victims, bystanders, whatever. And there's been some really interesting work on like, who are the people who do this, which we'll get to in just a second. I'll go fast. Okay, so we define the Holocaust. I think students always have questions, like why is Hitler so anti-Semitic? Why is he against Jewish people? I mean, I think that's like asking somebody, why are you a racist? Like, what answer could they possibly give you that you're like, oh, now I get it, right? Like, there's no logical answer to an irrational belief. So I think like on the History Channel, you can see a lot of different things about like, well, Hitler this or Hitler that, but basically he's tapping into a very long history of anti-Semitism, the history of Jews being the other in Europe. In fact, the word ghetto that we use now, thinking more about like a low class neighborhood, that word ghetto used to be the area in Italy where the Pope said, here's the area restricted by a gate where Jews can live. And they have to be back and behind the gates at a certain time. They can only have certain jobs. And that goes back to the Middle Ages. So the idea of separating people off is an old, long-standing practice, which doesn't mean everybody in Europe was anti-Semitic. That go kind of way back. So Hitler identifies the Jews as a problem for reasons that we can't quite put our fingers on. I think first the Nazis, as they come to power, encourage emigration, which means leave, get out. And in fact, actually half of the Jews living in Germany and Austria get out before the war starts. And you can imagine who that would be. That the people with international connections, maybe they've got a sister living in New York or a brother in London, an uncle in Rome or something, right? So if you've got family somewhere, if you've got a business you can sell, if you've got a bank account, you can just withdraw your cash and go. It's harder if you're like a peasant farmer, right? Like you can't bring your cows with you. You want to wait till your next crops come in. I mean, it's harder to get out if you are not like internationally connected and mobile. So the people who can get out, many of them do. In 1933, there were about 600,000 Jewish people in Germany, 185,000 in Austria, which is going to get attached to Germany pretty soon. By 1940, about half of them had fled. And especially they go to Western Europe, which I think would make sense. If you were there, you go kind of one country over. They go to France, Belgium, the Netherlands. Of course, that turned out to be a bad idea, right? Because the Nazis still show up there. So you think you got away in 1936 or 38, and then you're going to get taken back over in 1940. You could still get a second chance to get away, but it's going to be harder. Some people went to Switzerland. That was a good call. 8,000 people got into Switzerland, surrounded by the Alps, and they're neutral the whole war. So those people would have been safe. About 48,000 of that group went to Britain. Again, that turned out to be a good choice, except for the bombings. But you're going to not be persecuted there. 90,000 came to America. 60,000 went to the Middle East, what was called Palestine and becomes Israel after World War II, in large part because of the Holocaust. Because so many countries said, we don't want you. It was like, all right, we'll make a country where you won't be turned away if something like this ever happens again. 84,000 went to South America, and about 15,000 went to Shanghai, China. But it's really hard to leave, even if you've got connections. And let me just give you the example of the United States. And this is, thinking about the 1930s, Great Depression, our own problems in America, our own anti-Semitism, our own fear of immigrants, our own kind of problems and anxieties. And so if you wanted to get into America, you had to fill out a visa application. Okay. You had to have your birth certificate. Okay. You had to have a certificate of good conduct from the German police. That gets harder, right? Like that's doable maybe in 34, 35, but that's really hard to come by in 39 and 40, right? You had to have a physical exam at a U.S. consulate. So you had to be, mobile enough and organized enough to get an appointment to get somewhere to make sure that you weren't diseased. You had to have proof of permission to leave Germany, which of course becomes impossible. By 1941, Germans make it illegal to leave. So you can't even get that piece of it. And then you have to have two separate families sponsoring in the United States and their back tax returns. That is so much paperwork. And you're trying to organize it all. And you know that by the time you go to the consulate to get your medical examination, those results are going to expire by the time everyone else gets the, I mean, you can just imagine the circle of red tape to try to get out. But just kind of thinking about this structure. And I think for a lot of Jewish people, I know, like, I won't speak for you guys. Like, I'm a law-abiding citizen that like follows the rules and does the things that I'm supposed to do that my government tells me to do. And, I pull over when the police flash their lights behind me. And, follow directions and go slow in school zones, whatever. And I think for many people, it's unthinkable that they're going to be murdered by their own government. People ask, like, why do they show up at the train station, take the train to Auschwitz? Why do they? Because I think it's just unthinkable that what seems to be happening is happening. They just are in denial, right? So they pack their suitcase and they put on their shoes and they show up at 10 a.m. at the train station because they're told to, and they're just people that want to get along in life and live their little lives, and they don't want to be troublemakers. And so I think that's part of the kind of mentality of how the Holocaust happened, right? It's because it's so shocking. It's just such a huge scale. Like the video told us, the first steps. Those of you who looked at the overview module already followed this. So as Hitler invades the Soviet Union, like I said last class, he sends 3,000 troops behind him, an action squad. It's the SS, the Einsatzgruppen, and the goal is to kill entire populations. First, it's just kill the men of military age. Then it's kill all men. Then it's kill all people. And as they go through and get more greedy for the land, and that's populations of Jewish people, of Gypsies or Roma, of Slavs, to make room for German expansion. And by the end of 1941, the SS had killed 1.4 million Jewish people, just one by one by one. Come, dig your own grave, get shot in the back of the head. Come, dig your own. I mean, really, just like you saw the pictures in The Fallen of the mom holding the son, while the gun's pointed right, they're holding the child while the gun's pointed right behind them as they're going to fall into this grave. I mean, it's really hard to even imagine. And the goal becomes, there's a conference in January 1942, the Wannsee Conference, and the goal becomes to mass extinction of Jews, right? The goal is, there's 15 Nazi bureaucrats like sitting around a coffee table. We have the exact minutes of the meeting as they discuss how are they going to liquidate, how are they going to exterminate all of the Jews of Europe. And that's when they start setting up these camps in Poland, where people are going to either be gassed right away, killed right away, or worked to death until they die of starvation. So they round up these different Jewish populations. Most places hand over their list of Jews, like here's the tax records or here's the roll. Not every country, though, does that. We'll talk about in a minute. There are 1 million people that are killed at Auschwitz, the camp that they marked on the map there. And they get everybody off. They go to these elaborate lakes. So you pull in on your train station, having been transported in the cattle car, with no food and no bathroom breaks, and you're all squished together, and everyone's terrified. And they actually built in one place. They built like a fake railroad station front. And it's just the front. There's no back. You get off and you think like, oh, I'm at a railroad station. The ticket booth is closed. Like I'm in a real place, but you're not. You get out. Famously, you end up, being assigned to 1 of 2 lines, and they're told that you're going into the showers to be deloused because people had lice. So they're going in for the shower, separating families, separating people, and then obviously that's where the gas chambers are. Kind of, one of the lines or the other line goes to the bunkhouses. But they hide evidence of their crimes, and certainly as the tide turns and it becomes clear they're going to lose the war, they're actively burning records. I mean, the Holocaust is a really hard thing to research because the perpetrators don't want the evidence left behind, right? And the victims don't have the ability to make much evidence at the time, right? Like, what can you do when your suitcase is left behind, you're traveling, or you're hiding in the woods, you're hiding in someone's attic? You don't have often, Anne Frank has paper and a pen, but a lot of people don't even have that. Or those records are erased or stolen or not found from you. So I think it's a really complicated thing for historians to investigate. I think one of the reasons that the Holocaust is still kind of such a site for investigation or curiosity or interest is it's just such a shocking mix, right, of technology and science that used for these really awful ends for neighbors to murder neighbors, for people to kill each other, kind of for no reason. I read one historian was talking and he said the Holocaust is like it's a war, but it's a one-sided war. One side has all the weapons, right, and all the technology. The other side's completely defenseless. And then when all these people die, they die for nothing. I mean, there's no reason they needed to die. There's not any like goal in mind. It's such a weird regrouping for the Nazis of their resources, right? They're falling behind in Russia. You know, they're having to scramble to fight in Italy and in France, and they're still diverting resources to this project of just killing people. I mean, it's really, I'm not a psychologist, but it's psychotic, right? Like, I mean, it's not based in any kind of actual, I mean, the ends just fun. It means the ends are so ludicrous. Like, it's hard to even understand. Okay, so that's just sort of my overview bit. The discussion questions on the modules that I asked you, I want you guys to investigate closely one of two modules. So did anyone look at the first module yet? Just the overview about, it says from Kristallnacht to the Holocaust.
I went through that. It turns out I knew more about the Holocaust than I thought.
Okay. Charles, tell me a little bit what you learned from there. I had a couple questions. I don't know if you answered some of those questions or if you just pick your own notes from that module. I don't want to make you be the only speaker, but just if you have something to jump in with.
Like what? Sorry, I just had to go to the bathroom real quick. I just got back a
No,
second ago.
just for the Holocaust in general. I had some questions written down for that module. We've already kind of talked about the major phases that led to the Holocaust. What did you learn there about the role of individuals in the Holocaust? Is there anything that stands out in that?
For me, the biggest thing going through it was just, it's really hard for me going through this to not, I guess because it's mostly like a lot of political stuff, to not try and put a lot of politics in it. But I don't know, the biggest thing I learned was that the Catholic Church didn't recant the charge that Jewish people killed Christ until the 60s. That was wild.
Yeah, that was wild. Fair enough.
But individualism, it was one of the reasons why the Jewish people were so destroyed in Germany, because it wasn't just the government, but the government used their propaganda to turn the people against them. It's why whenever they did try and take up arms, I say take up arms, but Kristallnacht itself was because a Jewish teenager tried to assassinate a German emissary, and they use that as an excuse. They're like, "Oh, look, they're terrorists. They're shooting us," and then they, did a massive destruction campaign against the Jewish people, and then made them pay for the damages that they did to them.
Good. Good. Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. If you don't know the story of Kristallnacht, I think that's an important thing to look at. I was just scrolling through the module while you were talking, just the people who didn't pick that module. I think Katie, did you have your hand up too? Did you read that module also?
Yeah, I read the first one, and I was just going to add to like what Charles was saying about how they didn't recant the thing about the Jews killing Jesus until later, because I read in the article, I forget the guy's name, Joseph, the minister of propaganda.
Yeah, it doesn't have an R, but it's pronounced Goebbels. Yeah.
Oh, okay. About how he kind of like used that assumption, I guess, about the Jews that people had, like to be like, yeah, anti-Semitism, is or is not Christian. They're like, but Jesus even got mad and like compared them to like when he threw the money changers out of the temple, and then it kind of segued into, well, there's something genetically inherently wrong with the Jews after.
Yeah. I mean, it's just so you guys know on the record, I know you already know this, but like Jesus is a Jew. Like Jesus is Jewish talking to other Jews about how to fix Judaism. So it's not like Jesus was saying you guys are like this. He was like, we've been like this and we need to think of a more loving God. It's such a wrong article. I mean, everything you're saying is exactly right, Katie. It's just such a weird charge to throw that Jews killed Christ when they were all Jewish. They were all living like they're together, like he's Jewish too. But anyway, you're exactly right, and I'm glad you bring up the Goebbels speech, the Goebbels article. One of the things I really like about these modules is the way they bring different kinds of sources. So obviously there's photographs, but like you mentioned, then you can you link through. They're sort of interactive in that sense. Oh, it's gonna be hard for me to figure out how to get there. To get back, Katie, I hope I didn't cut you off. Did you have other things to add? No? Okay. Sorry, I didn't mean to jump in. Yeah, there's videos that have interviews. There's a whole thing on propaganda. So just something to think about and to kind of answering questions. What about the role of individuals? Did you guys get, we have Charles mentioned the teenager who kind of starts Kristallnacht by killing a German official. Did anything else come up about individuals? Did you read that one or no? Got laws here, articles. Okay, so one of the things to think about also is the role, I think the role of individuals. On the one hand, the Holocaust is so massive, right? You have, you know, it's so much bigger than any one person. On the other hand, every day it's decisions of individuals, right? Every day it's the decisions that people make. And that gets us to what I wanted to think about, like these categories of people, like who are the perpetrators? Perpetrators, you know, and collaborators, I guess they're kind of the same. Like who's making the Holocaust happen, right? So of course Hitler, right? Of course the 15 men sitting around this table at the Wannsee conference planning the final solution, right? Obviously they're responsible. Of course we could say the concentration camp guards, right? Of course, you know, we can kind of keep going on and on. But there's really kind of a long list of the way we can think about perpetrators. There's a study that was done on the people that were in these mobile killing units that went to through the Soviet Union and shot people one by one. I've been looking closely at them. And the name of the book is Ordinary Men. It's because they were just regular guys. They were guys that were probably a little bit too old to be drafted. They were in like their 40s or early 50s. A lot of them were like, a lot of them from the same town. And they signed up and they're put into this position, but they're given a complete choice. Do you want to do this, yes or no? And some of them say no, and they go back and they get reassigned to other work. But many of them, even if they don't want to literally be murderers, to be shooting women and children in the head every day, it's not because they're anti-Semitic, and it's not because they're super big Nazis. Like they're not, one of those things. They just are sort of like going along and doing their job, and their sense is like, I don't want to be the one who lets everyone down. I don't want to be the one who looks like like I'm not doing the right thing. And they have all these coping mechanisms, like one of them drink a lot. One of them in this awful, horrifying way says, basically like I always aimed to kill the children because I knew the mothers were going to be killed, and I could tell myself these children have no life growing up without a mother. It's the weirdest rationalization, right? Of how it's okay that you're killing. I mean, like every society has a taboo, right, against murder, and certainly against killing innocent people in cold blood, and the way they've got to talk themselves out of it. But it's not because their children are going to be killed if they don't do it, or they're under any kind of pressure. I mean, or they're going to get fired and lose their job. I mean, they are actually given a choice. I think this is something really important to remember. We'll talk more about choice next week please come to class next week with the perusal reading read ahead of time. I posted a reminder for next Tuesday because it's really philosophical, and it just won't work if I tell you what it says. It really will be more meaningful if we kind of look through it together. Sort of about like post-war kind of fallout. What do you make of a world when you've lived through World War II and the Holocaust? Like, how do you sort of make sense of the world? Perpetrators, just to stay on that for a minute, because I think that is sort of worth noticing. In 1961, make sure I have my date right, Hannah Arendt, who was a philosopher, she's actually herself a Holocaust survivor. She had escaped, I guess she's not a survivor because she's a Holocaust escapee. She's not in the concentration camp. She's able to get to America. And she's a writer for the New Yorker. In 1961, she goes to Jerusalem to watch the trial of Adolf Eichmann, who was accused of mass deportations and killings of Jews. He was kind of the architect of the Holocaust, was one of the nicknames. And she sits there and watches 90 survivors testify about what he did to them and what happened to them. And she's just shocked to see he shows no remorse. He shows also no deep anti-Semitism and no deep loyalty to Nazism. And he talks about his defense, of course, is I was just following orders, right? Like, even though he's really high up, he obviously finds him guilty and he's hung. But she writes about it and talks about how shocked she is. She coins a phrase, it's kind of famous, the banality of evil. Banality, something banal is like every day. Like if you think about a lot of people's Instagram posts, like this is my breakfast, here's my eggs, this is my walk to work, here's this tree, this is the clouds, like just very everydayness. And she's shocked because he's not a monster. He's not a psychopath. He's not somebody that you'd be scared of if he were your neighbor, right? He's somebody who probably loves his wife and children and thinks he's doing his job. And so she comes out and people actually get kind of angry because it's easier to think like, oh, all those Germans are bad acts, right? All those collaborators, I would never do that. And instead she's like, he's a regular guy trying to get ahead of his job. His job just happens to be to make the Holocaust happen. You know, she's not saying she doesn't want him to be forgiven. She just wants us all to kind of, I think, remember, like given any set of circumstances, everybody, you have to be really careful about the choices that you make. And what she talks about is this idea of this death mechanism, this machine mechanism, where he just sees himself as like a cog in the wheel. Like I'm just doing my part. This bigger machine is kind of above me. I don't know if you heard when he was talking. I wrote it down because I knew where we were going. When Robert McNamara was talking at the beginning of the movie today, he talks about maximizing efficiency. And he says, literally says, I was part of a mechanism that made this decision. If we had to find out how to bomb more efficiently, not in terms of killing more people, but like, what else does efficiency mean? Like, of course, efficiency means killing more people. Of course, it means destroying, more homes. And so I think it's interesting that he uses that language, kind of not thinking, but it is the same way Hannah Arendt hears Eichmann talk about what he's doing, right? That this is something I'm a part of this other thing. So I don't want to let the perpetrators off the hook, but I also don't want to put them in some category that's like not us, right? Like I want us to be really mindful of the choices that we make, and what we expect from ourselves. And it's really hard to say no to an authority figure who gives you a job you don't want. It's hard to stand up for something, even if not much is at stake. It's still hard, and I think that's one of the lessons and the important things of the Holocaust. I have a lot of other like perpetrator stories, but I think I don't want to give them negative attention. Right? I feel like we have to focus on other stories. The victim stories are a lot of what you guys get when you look through the modules. Did anybody, let's see, I guess in either module, I can ask you guys about what people did to resist the Nazis. Oh, there's Crystal Knot. That's the story of Crystal Knot. Does anyone have a story of resistance or anything they want to talk about? I could scroll down through here. Or look, tells you all together already. Yeah, Steve Benner, 1560. Any stories of individual resistance from either module, from the women module, or this is the killing?
They would try to like
Oh, that's
slow things down,
yeah. They who?
like the Jews. If there was like something that needed to get done, like they were building, they would break things or slow down.
God, that's a really great point, right? So resistance in terms of being an effective cog in the Nazi wheel, right? If you're working for the Nazis to help them build weapons or help them do whatever, right? To try to slow it down, that's a really good example. Other examples of resistance or rescue. This is all, I think this is mostly focused on the actual process. Let me go to the other one, the women one. Did anyone look at the women Holocaust? I can only see like one of you at a time here. So the women one is a little more targeted. So it's obviously just focusing on what does it mean to be a woman in this time period. But it's not just women see stories of resistance, resilience, and rescue. It's also stories of perpetrators. But there are stories here of rescuers and resistance. So just in general, I think there's lots of different kinds of resistance. So there's resistance like deliberately slowing something down. You can imagine resistance like if you live in Paris when the Nazis come and take over, the Nazi guard asks you for directions, you give them the wrong directions, right? It's like, oh, you turn left here when really it's the right or something, right? You could do things that are really small. There's a great story that I read. Do you guys know what artichokes are? Actually, I had one yesterday for lunch. If you don't know what they are, they look really weird. Next time you go to the grocery store, like look for artichokes. But you cook them and you really only eat the bottom part. You take each leaf off and just eat the very end, and then you scoop out and eat the heart. And this French woman who had to quarter Germans, artichokes used to be only kind of like a French delicacy thing. So she had to have these German Nazi soldiers living in her house. She was required to it. She and her older husband, they're both elderly. So she went to the market and only bought 3 artichokes for the soldiers, not for her and her husband. And she served them to them for dinner because she was responsible for feeding them. But knowing they wouldn't know what they were and that they'd be too proud to ask, these kind of peasant farmer, lowly French people, she said, like, watching them kind of choke down the artichoke, like trying to figure out how to eat it and eating the parts that they're not supposed to eat. I mean, for her, that was like her resistance. Obviously, she's not going to bring the Nazis down by giving them artichokes. But I think it's a nice story about how in your daily life, you could still kind of be doing something that made you feel a little bit powerful, like you had a little bit of agency, even if, in a lot of ways, you did not. There's bigger stories than the artichoke or the direction stories. Let me start with the entire country of Denmark, which all hail Denmark. In August 1943, the Germans asked the Danish government to work with them on rounding up all the Jews and give us your list and let's get the police force out. Let's go arrest everybody. And the entire government resigned. The king and queen stepped down, the prime minister, everybody's like, we are not going to work with you. And if you're going to do this, you're going to have to figure out how to do it yourself. That's a really big step. When Germany begins arresting Jews in Denmark on October 1st of 1943, and there are countrywide protests, the king and queen speak out. Priests and pastors in all these churches preach to their congregations. We have got to have humanity and fellowship and stand up for each other. Social organizations, economic organizations like what are they called? Like Rotary clubs, right? They all speak up. And throughout October, network of resistance workers gets Jews throughout all of Denmark to the coastline and ferries them to safely in Sweden. And over the course of 1 month, 7,200 people made this like border crossing. And it's really amazing because these are just fishermen with their little fisher boats. You can imagine a family of 2, 3, or 4 people at a given time, right? Maybe 10, and a laying down, being ferried across and rowed back. But really almost the entire local population of Jews in Denmark is safe from the Holocaust. They're safely in Sweden. And so that's a story about how like the peer pressure can be the other way. Peer pressure doesn't have to be to collaborate. The peer pressure can be to resist or to rescue. There's also a village in France where a similar kind of event wasn't coordinated by everybody. It was just people, neighbor whispering to neighbor, and then they all ended up hiding a lot of especially Jewish children and teenagers during the war. So there are happy stories. There's famous individuals. There's famous diplomats. One of the most interesting stories, and we don't have enough time, but I'll tell you a quick version of the story. There is he was a Japanese diplomat named Shione Sugihara. Shione. Yeah, do you know that story, Charles?
Yeah, he used his position to give a bunch of Jewish people passports so that they could get out. They were technically falsified, but he was doing it so much, like he was actually getting taken away and was still stamping passports and throwing them out the window.
Yeah, Charles, how do you know his story? Did you learn it at church? Where did you learn about it?
I just read a lot of random trivia, sort of like how. Also, another individual who helped a lot was Goebbels' brother, who he was in the Nazi Party because of his brother, just because his brother was like second in command, but he rejected Nazism and he used his position as such a high official in a fascist structure, which you do the hierarchy, to rescue a bunch of Jews out, because he would be like, hey, don't mess with those people. And they'd be like, but we hate Jews. And he'd be like, I'm Goebbels' brother. Like, I'm this high position. He was actually also in the Nuremberg trials, and he was almost hung, but so many Jewish people came forward to be like, no, he personally saved me, that he was excused.
That's fascinating. I will look into that. He's not on my list, but that sounds really great. Oskar Schindler, the famous movie Schindler's List, is Schindler's story. He was a kind of card-carrying Nazi with a factory of Jewish exploited workers, that when it's time for them to get sent to the concentration camps, he says no, and he buys kind of all their freedoms and spends all his money. Sugihara's story is really interesting. In part, I think, because it's World War II, and I think we're inclined to make the Japanese the bad guys in every story for valid historical reasons. But Sugihara's a diplomat stationed in Lithuania, but he speaks fluent Russian. He's there as a spy, basically. to try to kind of watch and report back to Japan what Russia's doing. And he's there when the war suddenly breaks out and all these Jews flee to Lithuania and they're knocking on the consulate door, help, help, I need papers to get out of here. And he and the Dutch consulate, the consul from the Netherlands, like Charles said, put together these, they're not orderly, right? They put together these papers and it's before computers, so you got to write each one by hand and stamp it and do all this. They're up for days once they decide to do it. And it says that these are people who have passage through Russia to get to Japan, to go to the Caribbean, to Curacao, which is an island that the Dutch own. They're not really probably going to get to Curacao, but the idea is just to get them out of Lithuania. And he really struggles. They're lined up, and he struggles for a couple of days about it. And I think part of that story is so interesting because he has no connection to them. He doesn't know any of them personally. He doesn't know anybody Jewish. I mean, it's not like it's part of his. So he actually asked the Japanese government 3 times, can I write some passports? I mean, can I make some visas? And 3 times he's told no. And Japan is not a place about disobedience, and violating authority is not a trait that's taught to people or valued in the society, certainly at the time. And the historian who I read, who wrote a book on him, he says basically the only way I can explain it is that he had aggressive goodness. And I just want to end with that idea. If we have the banality of evil, right, and this kind of everyday brutality that can darken people's senses and numb them to what's going on. And then we have somebody like Suihara, who's just aggressively good, trying to do something for strangers. He says, a teenage boy came into my office. Is he a criminal or danger? No, he's just a teenage boy who doesn't want to die, right? And so he kind of has that amazing empathy to help get thousands of people out, and all of them who were in Lithuania, who went to his, got his passports, did get out, which he finds out later in his life. Some of them come back to visit, and he becomes a beloved figure, a beloved savior. There's a bunch of other people too, but I just wanted to kind of get a taste of all sides. We didn't get a chance to talk much about the women one, but I don't know that any of you have had a chance to look at it yet. Oh, I forgot what we were going to do next. Okay, share screen really fast. Exam 3. I want you guys to pay close attention to sources because I want you guys to put together like a presentation for exam 3 on sources. Don't worry about all the details yet. I've got a model here. But basically what I want you to do is think about what do different sources tell us about a historical event, right? And you really need a lot of different kinds. We talked last exam a lot about poetry and art as sources. And so now we're going to look at other kinds of sources. So I want you to go back to today in this unit, not the Holocaust, because there's already so many sources at your fingertips from the modules. And this is one from a student from last year. So she's got one academic scholarly source, and she's found what it is and given me the link. And then I want you guys to write quiz questions about this. I want you to actually read it and do it. You can't just show me the picture. You've got to know, I'm not going to make you actually do the presentation, but I want you to prepare as if you were going to give a presentation. So she's got a quiz question here, question and answer. So I can see that she knows kind of what it is. A map, again, a source, a question, a document from the time, and she picks a timetable from the mill work. This is all of hers, was all about industrialization. And then she has her quiz question, interview with a factory girl with her multiple choice question, her artifact, true false question, like that. So you don't worry about it yet because it's not due for a week and a half, but do pay attention to sources as you're looking through the Holocaust module. I think that's kind of a good example for how different kinds of sources can give us different kinds of information and help answer different kinds of questions. I've got this stuff in folio, but I just don't want to freak you out about it yet. I just wanted to bring it up so you know kind of where I'm going with this week's stuff. What questions do you guys have? Is that too fast?
Just real quick, I misspoke. It wasn't Goebbels' brother. It was Goring's brother. I
Oh,
put it in the
okay.
chat.
Herman Goring. Okay. Thank you. I'm glad. I'll still look it up. Other questions about the exam, early thoughts? I want it to be something different than the essay, and I wanted to but I still want it to have you engage with history. But I think you'll find it hopefully a little bit more fun than the essay. All right. Otherwise, I'll see you guys on Tuesday. Happy spring weekend. Happy Easter if you're celebrating, and I'll see you guys in class or here on Tuesday. Everyone who turned in extra credit should already have it graded, not extra credit, on the exam revision. So check folio for that too. All right, thank you.